as we peruse the bill.
The Honourable Tracey Martin.
Mr Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First and my colleague Jenny Markroft to take a call on Conservation Indigenous Freshwater Fish Amendment Bill. New Zealand First will be supporting this bill at first reading, but we cannot commit to supporting it further. We have some concerns, but let's start with Mr Guy. And what's really interesting, what is incredibly interesting about a working coalition government is the National Party doesn't recognise it. The National Party doesn't actually recognise how a group of people can come together and discuss things in a grown-up and constructive way and actually make things better. But that would be because Mr Guy and the National Party have never had to discuss anything with the Klingons that they have been in government with before. If we come to the bill, Mr Speaker, let's start with the bits that are good. Let's start with the bits that New Zealand First supports. So first of all, we actually support, the Minister quite clearly articulated about what has actually been a silly piece of legislation before, where, for example, the YCare project that many of our schools run to make sure that our young people are able to participate in greater learning about what is their natural environment, what is part of protecting the future of New Zealand by going down into the streams and waterways that feed into the major waterways around their schooling areas and take out some of the living organisms in that stream for a short period of time. Strangely enough, they work with DOC to do this, and their clarity, what is in that waterway, they learn how that shows the clarity of that water, how clean are the streams, and they quite quickly put them back. The whole purpose is to teach the young people how to be part of what is the process of actually protecting our nation. So I think that's New Zealand First celebrates the changing of that piece of legislation to make sure that the YCare project and similar projects, in combination with our education system and the Department of Conservation, can, without worrying about 6-year-olds or 10-year-olds being arrested for taking bullies out of the stream, can go forward. Around fish passageways, those migrating fish that need to get to places and where man-made implements have been put in their way, again, we celebrate the fact that there must be a much more concentrated effort to make sure that we recognise that we don't, when we disturb the environment, we do it in a way that takes into account how can we work better with it. And I take on board the National Gateway, the Northern Gateway, which was the large motorway actually that ran from Orewa through to Orewa from Albany or wherever, but the culvert adaptation that was created during that project. It was brand new adaptations to create culverts with the possible ripples through it. So they were plastic inserts inside the culverts so that as the water ran, as the streams ran, the ripples and pool effect of a normal stream was able to be duplicated so that it didn't interfere with what is the process for our natural fish, our native fish. So there are ways for us to better work with our environment and make sure that we don't just override what is our progress supposedly, and then make sure that we take away things that are incredibly important to us. However, the concerns we have are the concerns around, for example, those articulated by Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson. Thank you, Mr. Guy. It's all right. We'll get there in the end. He's loud but not very effective. We do have similar concerns to Mr. Simpson, which is around the level of consultation that has taken place, which is around actually making sure that there aren't, while we're trying to protect one part of our environment, we aren't actually, we don't have unintended consequences that affect another. For example, if we do talk about, for example, trout in this nation, and can I just mention though, the comments by Honourable David Parker around koi carp. Absolutely agree that we have an issue in this nation with koi carp, and we really do need a concerted effort in this nation to deal with that problem. That needs to be at an educational level about those that are actually releasing goldfish into the environment, about those that have decided that it's a great species to have here without recognising that actually it's doing more to destroy our environment and costing us other species on the downstream of it. But I mean, 110,000 people buy trout fishing licences every year. We do need to make sure that when we make some rules over here, we don't have unintended consequences over here. And the Honourable David Parker acknowledged that there must be a way. There surely is a way through this, that through Fish and Game and through the Department of Conservation, and that is exactly, I would say, Mr Simpson, the real value of the Select Committee, because the Select Committee is where those groups can come and talk to the representatives of the Parliament without having to come and talk to representatives of parties individually, and where representatives of the Parliament can come together and through their, I suppose, what would you call it, the collective brain power that might be at a select committee, can come forward with those recommendations that make sure that as a nation we move forward. And that's the value of the Select Committee. So I don't think that, I know that it was a particular line that the opposition wanted to run about a particularly effective and very hard-working minister. I know that it's one of those things that they like to run when they see somebody doing their job as well as this minister is doing, then the opportunity to just have a little chip is always there. But that is exactly what Select Committee is for. That is the power of Select Committee, is to send a piece of legislation that has been thought out as well as it can be and yet sent to Select Committee so that the combined power of the Parliament, yes, Mr Simpson, you can participate fully, the combined power of the Parliament can actually bring their weight to bear and improve in those places where Mr Simpson would like to improve. So, Mr Speaker, before I sit down, I would like to say one further thing. Ms Dowie in her contribution talked about, I think it was her favourite fish, which is the long-finned eel. I would suggest, and one of the things that is happening with regard to, it's interesting, and when we talk about whitebait, is that glass eel, and so juvenile eels are actually being depleted in the wild because they are being fished so that they can be grown in sort of a farmed environment and then sold on. And it was the previous national government, unfortunately, that refused to provide any research dollars so that we could create, that Maharangi Technical Institute, for example, could break that 12-day barrier where young eels can actually feed off their own egg sac, and then we wouldn't have to deplete from the wild stocks, but we could actually have a highly profitable eel farming industry here in New Zealand without depleting our wild stocks. So it is interesting that it's something that Ms Dowie loves, but unfortunately none of them could fund. So with that, Mr Speaker, I will give the floor over to other colleagues, but as I say, New Zealand First hopes to work constructively, as we always do, with our Labour Party coalition partners, with the Supply and Confidence Green partners, because we know on this side of the House that when you talk with each other, anything can be solved. Kia ora.
Mr Speaker,
the Honourable.
well, what we just heard from Tracey Martin was the payback